Hello, Australia. I am very excited to be back, albeit virtually, for my third uh, Puppet Camp Australia, that is. The last few times I was able to be there in person, but this time I guess you get to deal with me over the internet, which I don't know, honestly, is probably the best way to consume me, I think. Because in general, for best results, I highly recommend that everyone interact with me in small, time-limited doses, separated by large amounts of geographic distance. Ideally, with an ability to mute me whenever you want. And honestly, that's how I prefer to interact with most human beings anyway. So I feel like I'm in my element here. Also, it's kind of nice because I don't get to hear any boos or jeers. So I'm just going to assume everything I'm saying is going great. So I'm broadcasting from my broadcasting live from my Fortress of Solitude in Denver, Colorado. Um, Colorado, I'm not sure to what extent Australians are aware of the concept of Colorado. I guess Colorado has a lot in common with Australia. It's really sunny here, and I don't know, most Americans can't find it on a map. So feel like I sympathize with you all. And technically, I'm Canadian, so I think we have a Commonwealth relationship. And also, I think I'm honor bound whenever I see the Queen, I have to salute or something. I don't know. I moved from Canada a long time ago. So, for reference, for those of you who don't know where Colorado is, it is here. So, it's like in the middle of everything. So, I'm trying to think of an Australian analog of this. Maybe Colorado, maybe it's like the Alice Springs of America. I don't know. Is there anyone from Alice Springs on this event that could confirm or deny? No? Are there humans that live in Alice Springs? Maybe. Well, hit me up on Slack. I definitely want to know. Um, so moving on because I have a keynote to give. So I want to start with 2019. Um, 2019. Does everyone remember 2019? Fun fact: it was the year right before this one, and it was only 5 months ago. 2019 is a bit of a mind warp when I sort of go into my mind palace and I think back to just how quaint everything was. I mean, not really, but I think like the biggest source of stresses I personally had was probably a combination of like, I don't know, it was mostly when the next season of Westworld is coming out or maybe that next Christopher Nolan movie. But yeah, things are a little bit different now. So here's a sample. This is a word cloud of some inquiries that analysts got. And most of this, I think, is pretty reasonable, I suppose. So this was what people were thinking about in 2019. This is like the proxy for that. There's a lot of stuff here that I think makes a lot of sense. It's pretty reasonable, like cloud, DevOps, digital transformation, security, all those kinds of things. I do want to give a shout out to the folks that were inquiring about application rationalization. That's in the lower right-hand corner because, spoiler alert, people, none of our applications are rational. It doesn't matter what year it is. So that's 2019. 2020, well, here is my surprise face about what 2020 actually has in store here. This should probably not shock anybody that the things that were top of mind in terms of inquiries are things like coronavirus and COVID, remote work, cloud as a general thing. Although I'd also like to give a shout out to procurement in the lower right-hand corner, and which I assume is procurement of servers and stuff and not like, I don't know, toilet paper and breakfast cereal. But, I think, which I don't know what it's like in Australia, but I have certainly had a lot of difficulty acquiring both the toilet paper and breakfast cereal that I require in order to stay alive. It's honestly the lifeblood of my place in the industry. The interesting thing about this, I think, this is from March of 2020, is just how little time elapsed to completely change the kinds of things that were top of mind for everybody that was asking questions. And I think that's honestly just really emblematic of the situation that we often find many of us find ourselves in at this point. And I think the pandemic has just changed fundamentally how so many of us think about so many different things, especially with relation to the kind of work that we do. The way in which all of us are doing work is completely different. The demands placed on the infrastructure, the applications that a lot of us manage is, in many cases, also completely different. This is a slide from PagerDuty. They did some research and they found that, no surprise, I mean, this is something intuitive, I think, for a lot of us, but it was I thought really interesting that they quantified it, which is that a ton of organizations are right now under a pretty massive amount of stress, which one would expect, right? Just due to the rapid increase in demand for all of their services. And that increase in demand has had a corresponding increase in the number of incidents that all of these companies are experiencing. And most of us that are on this, most of us that are listening to me speak right now, myself included, are probably in that line of response for when these kinds of incidents actually occur. And I think it's really interesting to look at the, this is just a sampling of a couple of different verticals when they went to categorize it. Online learning, no surprise, is at 11x. I'm not sure what it's like in the rest of the world, but in most of America at this point, schools are all shut down and everyone is doing distance learning for all of their kids, which I've also, which has made me learn how really terrible I am at a lot of very basic elementary school things like, I don't know, math and, I don't know, infrastructure is hard, but try teaching like a 5-year-old how to properly hold a pencil and like, I don't know, they're roughly equivalent, I think. They're in the same equivalence class. The interesting thing I think about this is that all of them that you're seeing listed are above 1.0x, right? And actually the part that you don't see, the rest of the industry, they said on average are experiencing about double the number of incidents, which I think demonstrates that the overall demand on all of these services is going up, which again, I think is pretty intuitive. We would kind of expect that as more of us are doing things remotely, we're putting more pressure on all of these underlying systems. And even for those of us that work in businesses that aren't one of these that are listed, chances are a lot of the services that we build or maintain or operate or secure are themselves in that same chain of delivering a service to an end user. And because it's along that chain, we're going to be feeling the sting of all this stuff too. So there's a lot of things I think that we're all being asked to do now. We're being asked to do more with less, and we're being asked to do more with specifically less time and in many cases less resources. There's no secret that the overall kind of global economy is in this state of, I will say, I'm not an economist, but I believe the professionals refer it to, it's not great, dude. So that generally means we don't have as many of the resources as we normally find at our disposal in order to be able to handle all this stuff. I think we're also being called upon to safeguard our infrastructure and applications to a much greater degree than we were before, especially given that so much more stuff now is happening remotely. In a very real sense, I think the attack surface for a lot of infrastructure and applications is itself also extended in relation to that. And then lastly, I think there are a lot of processes. Security processes probably are some of the big ones, again, because of now very short amounts of time required to give people remote access to all the things that they need. But in general, I think processes are, there's a demand for us to have things go through all of the traditional processes that we'd want them to go through much more rapidly. So, the way that I think about it, like, I think you could squint, you could take a step back and you could squint at all this and you could say that none of this is really novel or interesting. We've always had to care about this, right? Like nothing's really different now. But I don't think it's necessarily what we're being asked to do that's different as much as it is the urgency with which we're being asked and how well can we handle all of that alongside all of the other stuff that we have to worry about now, right? So if I frame this up in a different way, I like to think about it like this. My brain, if you kind of cracked open my dome piece and looked at my brain through an electron microscope, I think it's pretty much just like bar charts and probably cartoons, as was mentioned earlier. If anyone is aware of any cartoons that are primarily about bar charts, like that would be great. Like hit me up on Slack. I will absolutely watch it. So if you romanticize the past like I do, and that's one of my most heartily recommended defense mechanisms in this time of crisis, I'd like to think about it like this. So this represents what I like to think of as the total brain power I have in a day until when you get to the top and past that point, it's like, I just can't even, So, if I think fondly with my rose-colored glasses on, work would ideally, most of the time, fit within this max brain power range, with some headroom to spare. And I could use that headroom for useful things like spending time with my family, or more likely, honestly, for me, spending like 2 hours trying to find a movie to watch on Netflix, but only ending up rewatching Mortal Kombat like for the fifth time. It's totally worth a watch. So, that's, I think, the good old days, which may or may not have actually existed, but I like to think about it this way. I think yesterday, or maybe 2019, whatever timeline you want to put this on, I think more recently the chart looks more like this, where the work has officially exceeded the brain power that I have available for it. Only like, it's like a computer where you have too many things open and you have insufficient RAM, but only unlike a computer, my brain doesn't exactly have a ton of swap space available. So if I run out of memory, I'm pretty sure my body just starts shutting down random processes as some sort of coping strategy. But if I could swap stuff to disk, honestly, probably the Mortal Kombat movie would be an ideal choice to actually get out of there, to free up some of my brain power to actually solve some of the work problems that are in front of me. And then if I go today, today is, as we say in America, completely bananas. Which is, I have all the work that I was asked to do before, and also I have additional stuff because time is of the essence and time is not our friend. And there's 10x the number of people hitting our site or putting utilization or demands on whatever it is I'm doing. So that's not great. I also have to deal with homeschooling my kids, or more likely I just put Frozen 2 on for the 18th time. Combined with a certain degree of existential dread and lack of clarity around what actual day of the week it is. And I think all this kind of illustrates a concept that I like to think of in relation to a metaphor that they've been using for pandemic response already, which is this idea of flattening the curve. So, the concept of that, for those who are not aware, is want to take the peak utilization of medical facilities, and you want to bring that peak ideally closer to the average, or underneath where the actual capacity line is, so that you never have a peak that overwhelms your ability to actually deal with it. But I think for IT and operations folks, I think that's a really good analogy, and I really like that. And I kind of internalize that in terms of a stress curve I think that IT feels as a generalized concept, which is there's a certain amount of stress capacity I think that we have, both in terms of like our capacity as IT workers, as engineers to be able to just deal with stuff, the capacity of our infrastructure to be able to deal with stuff. And we want to get those peaks down to a point that is below where we exceed. We want to be below the point where our capacity is exceeded, because at that point, I think we're at tremendous risk of, I think, burning ourselves out or making poor decisions or having our systems fail. And none of those things are good. So, how do we kind of think about that going forward, right? And another way of distilling the problem that I think about is that the pandemic, I feel, magnifies our strengths and our weaknesses, both as engineers, as leaders within companies, as just general human beings. I think this similarly affects our applications and our infrastructure as well. It's put pressure on us in a way that amplifies the strengths and in a way that amplifies the weaknesses. The things that we're really good at, the things that our applications or our infrastructure or our processes were really good at, well, now is the time for those things to shine. But the things that we were never so great at, or that we knew that we had a lot of room for improvement, well, we might not have the time to really rapidly improve upon that stuff. And we're being forced to deal with it now, maybe in a way where we could countenance that a little bit easier and better before. So I think moving forward, the stuff I think that ends up surviving in these kinds of environments, like, if I look at it from an engineering point of view, like systems and processes that do better in these kinds of situations are the ones that tend to be the most flexible. So how quickly can you add capacity? How quickly can you patch your systems? How quickly can you push out changes to applications? How readily can you move your applications somewhere else where there's more room for them or they're more responsive? How fast can you get a change approved by the people that need to rubber stamp them? Or how quickly can you leverage a new tool like Blue Jeans, like we're having this event on, or Zoom, or other video conferencing, or VPN, or other services that you might need to take advantage of. the stuff that ends up being the most flexible is the stuff I think that has the best path forward. And this shouldn't be a surprise to hopefully many of you, because I think in a lot of ways that's what all of the DevOps research that we've been doing every year and the State of DevOps report has continued to beat the drum about. It's all about flexibility and our ability to kind of be agile and respond to change more rapidly, more safely, and more reliably. And I think this really shines a light on some of those things. In that the places where we are flexible, I think we'll probably end up doing the best. But I also think that, in general, the bar here for a lot of people and a lot of companies is pretty low. And I think if I take a step back and look at what makes a lot of this environment really challenging, it's that so many things are just so hard. So many of our systems are tied together with what I like to call digital duct tape. It's just all the little things, whether it's tiny bits of scripting, whether it's semi-automatic or completely manual processes that just tie together our worlds, inside of IT. And it's oftentimes so janky. That's a word. I think it's a word. I'm going to go with it. It's janky how we tie things together. All our apps, our networks, our infrastructure, all the processes. And there's a ton of room for improvement, because I think duct tape is awesome, but also under a tremendous amount of stress. Hopefully you can get where the metaphor is going here. So how do we lean into that? I think a lot of companies, and I think a lot of solutions, it's really facile to kind of take a step back and say, obviously the way forward for everybody is to take a step back, completely rethink everything about how you're doing IT, abandon all of these antiquated processes, refactor your apps so that they're ultimately flexible and super resilient, and they have all the HA characteristics that you want. Like, sure, obviously those are great ideas, but none of us have the capacity or capability of doing that just like that with the snap of a finger or on the turn of a dime. So one of the things I think about, in my capacity as CTO here is, I think about this a lot in trying to determine, what products should we be building, what features do we need to include, and what do we do next? So let's talk about it. So first, I want to talk about tasks. So tasks, I think, are awesome, and I wanted to start with that first because, again, there is so much glue out there, and part of the reason why we've invested so much energy as a community and why we've rallied around our task technologies, in particular things like Bolt, is because I think everyone in the community has realized how much low-hanging fruit there is in terms of automation that there actually is out there in everyone's environment. So Bolt and tasks are designed to make it extremely easy to connect all of these things together to actually mechanize some of this like semi-automatic duct tape that you actually have. Put enough of the kind of constraints and good practices and guardrails around it so it can actually thrive in that kind of environment. So rather than kind of undo all the automation that you may have that you're not super happy with, instead, how can we make it so that you think about it as a running start? It's a running start on getting more pervasive automation that you have throughout your environment. And that is what ultimately I think will help make people's environments more flexible. So that's why I'm super happy about everything that's been going on with Bolt. And for those of you if you haven't tried Bolt, you absolutely should. And if you are a Puppet Enterprise customer, or if you're interested in kind of having more enterprise features around running tasks, PE represents an enterprise-grade version of running all of these tasks with all the access control and auditing and logging and things like that you would like. But the main idea here is there's no reason why we can't take the duct tape that we have and apply it to more things, but in a way that makes us feel kind of safe and in reasonably good hands. There is so much glue in how people understand what they have. I'm sure if I probably asked you all, and maybe this is a good Slack poll, which is if I asked you how many systems you have, how many different places would you have to look in order to find it? And if the answer is more than one, then that's probably too many. So one of the big things that we've been doing in PE with respect to is in service of what we call estate reporting, which is making it really easy for everybody to leverage the data that we're already collecting by virtue of having Puppet running on all your systems. This is all data that is collected via Factor or that's inside of Puppet DB. And this helps make it, we want to help make it really easy to surface all this information to you so that you have a very good understanding and just situational awareness of what you have, where it's at, what needs help, so you can help triangulate exactly where to go, what's most high value for you to actually go in and automate. I think another example of the duct tape phenomenon would be the work that we've done recently with companies like ServiceNow, where sometimes it turns out that a lot of the duct tape we have is not necessarily, it's not a script, it's not technological, it's human. And actually, the biggest bottleneck in many processes might not be how long it takes to deploy something, but it might be hitting refresh on a ticket, see when the state gets updated, right? So in situations like that, how can we close that loop a little bit easier? How can we make all of that much more automatic? I think a great example of this kind of philosophy you could see in fellow Australians, folks from Transurban. They give a fantastic talk at Puppetize PDX about this, and I highly encourage you to look up. There's a link on the screen, and if that disappears off the screen too quickly, definitely hit us up on Slack and we can get you that link. But it's highly worth watching. But they did a really great job at kind of exemplifying how to get that loop going and close it. So again, you're mechanizing and automating and making more flexible the entire system by integrating more of these disparate parts together. Compliance, I think, is another big area where there's a ton of digital duct tape out there, which is oftentimes people find themselves spending a ton of time generating reports, actually determining how compliant you actually are. That hasn't gone away in current circumstances. And in fact, the security pressures that the pandemic is placing on a lot of our infrastructures, I think, has enhanced the desirability of being able to see just how compliant your infrastructure actually is. So rather than have you do the manual work of going from step to step to step to step to step in order to actually prove any of this stuff out and report on it, wouldn't it be nice if we could automate much more of that entire chain of steps? And that's exactly what we're doing with our upcoming CIS compliance features, which is intended to do exactly that. So for any of you that have ever had to produce a report for auditors, well, the subset of you that really enjoyed that, okay, well, this product is not for you, and continue to enjoy your meticulously handcrafted auditing reports. And for the rest of us, myself included, I would much rather have the robots take care of this so that I don't have. Patching. I think this is something where it's easy to overlook because it's something that almost seems like, why isn't this a solved problem everywhere? And yet the fact that it keeps coming up is indicative of the fact that it is absolutely not a solved problem. This is extremely basic. A really good example of this in current times would be if your infrastructure now is having more systems participate in it due to remote access, does your patching system or does your patching methodology extend appropriately to cover all of those endpoint devices? And even if it doesn't, if more people have access to more of your infrastructure, are you making sure that there is hardened against all the known exploits as they should be? How do you do that in a way that comports with all the processes that you have in place? So this is an area that I think we're super interested in, and obviously a ton of you have been using Puppet for patch management for a long time now. Tony, who I believe is going to be presenting later, gave a great talk on this at Puppetize PDX. And I'm sure he loves patching so much he enjoys talking about it in his spare time, possibly more than he enjoys talking about Star Wars, which is a lot. So this is an area where I think we believe that we have a lot to offer here, where we can take the core Puppet technology that we have and put an enterprise patching workflow on top of it that takes advantage of the fact that under the hood, Puppet can handle a variety of different operating systems. It's completely at home and thrives in a massively heterogeneous environment. And we've been doing patch management for years. So this is an area where I'm super excited about it. Along the same lines, I think vulnerability remediation, which is in many cases part of the motivation behind patching systems in general, this is another place where there's just a lot of links in the chain that now we might not have the luxury of time in order to be able to respond to it. And this is affecting everybody. You don't have to just be Zoom incorporated to feel the sting of security vulnerabilities in the stuff, both in the applications you produce or in the applications that you consume or in the infrastructure that you manage. This is yet another one of those places where there are so many different steps most people have to go through in order to get value, in order to understand what is actually vulnerable, and most importantly, how do I prioritize my effort and my time to focus on the most critical vulnerabilities? Again, time is not of the essence, and we're asked to do more with less time available to us. This is, again, a place where robots can really be assistive, and they can help point us in the right direction, make it easier for us to really find the biggest security holes and then fix them up front. So this is what we've been doing in Puppet Remediate. And for those of you who haven't looked at it, like, you absolutely should, because it's awesome. And it makes a lot of this so much easier. The last couple of things I want to say along this theme is that for those of you who ever have consumed or written or published or hacked on or forked Puppet modules, I definitely want to share with you that we've been doing some work on the Forge in order to put more of the end results of what you're trying to get done. So rather than just having a point solution module here, can we wrap that up in longer pages that contextualize exactly what those modules are good for? So for example, here's a module that does a small part of patch management. We surface that inside some content that actually helps you go from start to finish to make patch management a reality, or how to incorporate things like PowerShell into Bolt, or how to automate over Windows using Chocolatey. So this content is rolling out as we speak, so definitely go and check it out, and give us suggestions on what other kind of comment you would like to see, or ideally what you could help contribute in terms of how-tos or other kind of guides. That would be fantastic. The last thing I want to mention, and I'm not going to talk about this too much because Eric is going to come on right after me and talk more about this, is one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that in this age of infrastructure, the early word clouds I had up, people were increasingly moving stuff onto cloud. They're increasingly taking advantage of other services that we're trying to use. Our applications are more complicated than ever. And how do we make it so that it is easy to do all of the automation on these more complicated applications than it was before? And part of the problem here is that some of this is not necessarily a scripting kind of problem. It's more of a workflow problem. My theory is that as time goes on, managing applications in the future is going to look more like managing workflows and running workflows that do intense automation as opposed to running scripts on them. So in that kind of environment, what do we do? How do we make it so that people can develop, articulate, and share workflows that make it easy to automate all the different things you need to do in your infrastructure? Then, how do we democratize that and make it easy for everybody to do? Whereas right now, oftentimes it's limited to the Googles and the Netflixes and things like that of the world, because they have all of the time and energy and skill set to build all this stuff bespoke just for themselves. But how do we take that same philosophy and broaden it and make it accessible to everybody? So that's just the teaser, and I don't want to talk too much about that and steal Eric's thunder. I will let him rain the thunder down. I don't know meteorology. I'm sure there's something in there for everybody, though. Ultimately, I think that's it. Hopefully this is a bit of a whirlwind tour, but at the end of the day, the point I'm really trying to get across is that in times of stress, I certainly feel it. I've been coping. I got a new kitten, so that's how I've been coping. But I highly recommend that for everybody because kittens are fantastic. But aside from the kitten part of your overall automation strategy, like, there's a ton of other opportunities there, and I think all of you probably have a running start. You've all probably tied systems together. You've all probably written some kind of script. You've all probably hit refresh on something that you wish could be more automatic. Like, you've all experienced the pain, and I think you all are on this call because I think you understand the overall philosophy around DevOps, around automation, and what we're trying to do. So hopefully my going through of just like a couple of high points from the product portfolio tries to emphasize the fact that that running start is good. You don't need to start over. And I don't think you can start over. And people asking you to, I think it's unreasonable. So I hope you all take this and run with it. And in the meantime, I hope you all are being safe and you're staying healthy, and watch Mortal Kombat and talk to me about what your favorite character is. The answer, by the way, is Johnny Cage. That's all I got. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.